Let me ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly before we go any further. How much money do you have sitting in a bank account right now? Not invested, not in stocks or real estate, just sitting in a checking or savings account at a single institution. Because what I am about to show you in the next 20 minutes has a direct and immediate consequence for every dollar you have parked in the American banking system right now. And the reason you have not heard this from your bank, from your financial advisor, or from any major news network is not because it is not true. It is because the people who would normally tell you are the same people who need you to stay calm and keep your money exactly where it is. I have been tracking the data behind 3 specific categories of bank failure for months. The signals are not subtle anymore. They are flashing. And the window to act rationally before this becomes a panic is measured in months, not years. Stay with me, because the first number I am going to show you in about 60 seconds is going to make you look at your bank statement very differently than you did this morning. Before I give you that number, I need you to understand something about how bank failures actually work, because most people have a completely wrong mental model of this. They imagine a bank failure as a sudden dramatic event. Sirens, locked doors, news cameras. The reality is almost the opposite. Bank failures are slow, and then they are instant. They build quietly for months or years underneath the surface, while everything looks completely normal on the outside. And then one specific trigger, one piece of information that reaches enough depositors simultaneously, converts a slow-moving problem into a 48-hour catastrophe. Silicon Valley Bank did not fail because something suddenly went wrong in March 2023. It failed because something that had been wrong for over a year finally became visible to enough people at the same time. The question I want you to hold right now is this: what is already wrong at American banks today that most depositors cannot see yet? The answer to that question is worth staying for. I am going to give it to you right now. Here is the number: $650 billion. That is the current estimated unrealized loss sitting on American bank balance sheets from bond portfolios. Write that down. $650 billion. Not losses that have been reported, not write-downs that have been taken. Unrealized losses. Paper losses that exist in reality, but have not been formally recognized, because accounting rules allow banks to carry certain bonds at their original purchase price, rather than what those bonds are actually worth today. Here is why that matters more than almost any other number in the financial system right now. When interest rates rose aggressively over the last 2 years, the market value of existing bonds fell. Every bank that loaded up on long-duration bonds when rates were near zero is now holding assets worth significantly less than what they paid. The only thing standing between that paper loss and a real crisis is an accounting rule. And accounting rules do not protect you when depositors start moving money. Now, I want you to think about something while I set up the next piece of this. If your bank is sitting on hundreds of millions in unrealized bond losses, and you and every other depositor knew about it, what would you do? Hold that thought. We are coming back to it in about 2 minutes, and the answer connects directly to what happened in January of this year. Silicon Valley Bank failed in 48 hours in March 2023. Not 48 days, 48 hours. One moment it was a functioning institution, and then it was not. And the reason it happened that fast is something that has permanently changed the risk profile of every regional bank in America. But almost nobody has updated their mental model to reflect it. A bank run in 1930 required people to physically line up outside a building. The process was slow. Regulators had time to respond. Management had time to craft a narrative. Depositors had time to calm down. A bank run in 2026 happens on a smartphone. It happens at 2 a.m. on a Saturday. It happens because one post from one credible source reaches enough people simultaneously, and within hours, billions of dollars are moving through digital transfer systems that never close. The traditional bank-run containment playbook is completely obsolete in a world where every depositor carries a fully functional bank branch in their pocket. and regional banks with concentrated depositor bases are specifically and catastrophically vulnerable to this dynamic. Now here is the question I promised you 2 minutes ago. I asked what you would do if you knew your bank was sitting on hundreds of millions in unrealized bond losses. You already know the answer. You would move your money. And that is exactly what happens when enough depositors figure it out at the same time. The only question is whether you figure it out before or after the move starts. Now let me add the second layer, because the bond portfolio problem is serious, but it is not even the most immediately dangerous pressure building in the regional banking system right now. I want to talk about commercial real estate, and I need you to stay with me through this because the numbers here are genuinely alarming once you understand the timeline. When the pandemic hit in 2020, office occupancy in major American cities collapsed. Companies discovered that remote work functioned well enough that maintaining large, expensive urban office footprints was no longer necessary or justifiable. 6 years later, that occupancy has never fully recovered. San Francisco downtown office vacancy is running above 30%. New York is above 20%. Chicago, Los Angeles, and every other major American city tells a similar story. The buildings did not disappear. The mortgages on those buildings did not disappear. But the rental income those buildings were supposed to generate to service those mortgages has been permanently impaired. And now comes the part that connects to 2026 specifically. Approximately $1.5 trillion in commercial real estate debt needs to be refinanced between now and the end of this year. Refinanced at interest rates that are dramatically higher than when those loans were originally written. A building that generated enough cash flow to cover a mortgage at 3% interest simply cannot cover the same mortgage refinanced at 7%. The math does not work. The banks holding those loans know it. And for the last 2 years, they have been doing something called extend and pretend, rolling over maturing loans, extending terms, hoping that office occupancy recovers, or that rates fall enough to make the numbers work. That strategy is running out of runway right now in 2026. And the question I want you to sit with is this. What happens to a regional bank that has concentrated commercial real estate exposure when 1.5 trillion in loans come due simultaneously and a significant percentage of the borrowers cannot refinance at current rates? The answer to that question is what the next 90 seconds are about. The answer is write-downs, forced recognition of losses that have been sitting on balance sheets unacknowledged for years. And when those write-downs hit, they do two things simultaneously. They reduce the bank's capital cushion, which is the buffer that regulators require banks to maintain as protection against losses. And they become public information in quarterly earnings reports that depositors and equity investors can read. When depositors read about large write-downs at their bank, the smartphone bank-run dynamic I described earlier activates. This is the sequence that regulators are quietly terrified about and that they will not discuss publicly because discussing it publicly accelerates the exact outcome they are trying to prevent. The category of banks most exposed to this collision of unrealized bond losses and commercial real estate write-downs is not the largest institutions. J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo have diversified balance sheets and the implicit government backstop that comes with being designated too big to fail. The banks I am watching are the regional institutions, banks with assets between $10 billion and $100 billion that were aggressive in commercial real estate lending during the low-rate era and that loaded up on long-duration bonds when yield was scarce. These banks do not have the capital diversity to absorb both problems simultaneously when they collide. And the collision is happening right now in the second quarter of 2026. Here is what this means practically for you and your money. The FDIC insures deposits up to $250,000 per depositor per institution. If you have more than $250,000 at any single bank, the amount above that threshold is not insured.